I would like to ask one question specifically. You mentioned that the consortium that designed the testing instrument. Did I understand correctly that they actually own that test, and speak to that, and also the cost of accessing those tests or administering those tests versus the cost that typically we have to pay for testing instruments?
They were provided grant money for the development of the test. Implementation of the test is cost that will be borne by states. So the cost that you generally spend $5, a little more than $5 per student on assessment in this state. The cost of PARCC, which is the consortia that you belong to, has gone up to $30 per student for the online version, up to $37 for the paper and pencil version. Now keep in mind, if you do the online version, you're going to have costs of developing new computers and increasing the bandwidth for your school districts out there. If you do the paper and pencil version, you're going to pay more per test. So either way, the fiscal note is coming to you. My understanding is that's right now about $28 million for next year for you to administer this new assessment in the coming year. And in the absence of that, I don't know that you have the capacity to administer that assessment, and I don't know what the technology fiscal note is. I could do some research and find out and try to get that to you.
Thank you so much. I would mention to any House members that we may have, y'all feel free to come on up and take a seat. This is a joint meeting. We have some questions. Number 25, who is it? Senator Hufstadler.
I've got a question in regards to have the states that have been in this, have any of them opted out? And if they have opted out, have they received financial penalties from the federal government?
I believe Virginia was originally in. They have opted out. Minnesota, partially, they decided to retain their math standards as their original math standards were higher. I don't know of any penalties that have been imposed, and I doubt the legality of the department imposing any such penalty. I look to the most recent Supreme Court decision in the Affordable Care Act, and I read the concurring and dissenting opinions to say, and they use education as a specific example, that the federal government can't give a grant to a state and then change the rules and then threaten to take that money away. So I think that there's the potential for litigation there, there's potential for clarification there, but I think it was a signal that there are some areas of the spending clause that the federal government can't simply give money out as a grant and then change the rules along the way.
I have a question from, I think, Senator Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you answered my question, but I was concerned what state that's already accepted the Race to the Top program and also has obtained a waiver from No Child Left Behind. I mean, what are the considerations the state in that situation would need to be making?
Well, you have the bully pulpit of the U.S. Department of Education, and your neighbor, South Carolina, was making rumblings about getting out as well. And there were statements made about how they were backing off of accountability and how they were, doing things to the detriment of their state and their children. So that was one piece of it. I don't know that they're in a position to financially penalize you for getting out. So I don't know that they have ever said that they have intended to take away everybody's money. They talked about penalizing states that haven't met their deadlines, and I think Georgia is one of the states that, particularly on the teacher evaluation piece, they've threatened to penalize. We have been penalized as a state in the past for failing to meet deadlines with respect to special education caps, and we were penalized, we were fined administrative funds. So that was the agency's budget, not school districts. I've never seen an instance where the department has gone after the corpus of Title I funds that go directly to schools and serve children.
Thank you, sir. Representative Sessions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate your presentation today. As I understand, there are a number of states, Georgia certainly through the Georgia Performance Standards raised its curriculum standards in the last several years. Massachusetts has been cited as an example of really sort of setting the standard, of having the best standards in the country. Am I to understand that Massachusetts standards are higher than the these federally proposed standards would be. Is that fair to say?
It is more accurate to say they were higher. They adopted Common Core, and so I think they reduced the rigor of their standards.
So it's clear that states can have even more rigorous standards at the state level. It doesn't take this federal effort to have high and internationally benchmarked standards. Given that, and given that the state can set standards much higher than Common Core, and I think we'd be well advised to do that, that seems to we seem to lose the benefit of this. And the concern, would you have a concern that a state like Massachusetts or other states that have set high standards could, in future years, have the issue of a national curriculum on social studies? Here's what we're going to teach about the Constitution. Here's what we're going to teach about climate change. Here's what we're going to teach about literature. Can you see this being a political football that becomes a prize to the victor goes the spoils? Both conservative administrations, progressive administrations could kind of see this as a prize that could be fought over in coming decades, back and forth on curriculum?
Yeah, look, let me be very, very clear. This is not a partisan nor ideological issue for me. I wouldn't give this power to Reagan. I wouldn't give this power to Bush. I wouldn't give this power to anybody at that level, because I believe decisions about children should be made closest to them, by their parents, by their teachers, by their principals, by their locally elected school boards. So, and you talked about the politicization of it. In the first round of the secondary math standards, they had a class called modeling, which is normally a bridge between Algebra 1 and Algebra 2. And the only standard originally listed was the student will be able to use charts and graphs, for instance, CO2 emissions and global temperatures over time. That was the only standard listed in the first draft. So I think that you've injected the issue of global warming into that math class. And you may think that's a fine analysis, and it may very well be a fine analysis. But who's to say who gets to choose the next example? And the example in Texas of a social studies curriculum that portrayed the Boston Tea Party as a terrorist act, and said a group of terrorists went on private property and destroyed a bunch of private property, much to the chagrin of their owners, and were helped by hoodlums in the neighborhood escape in the night. That's how the Boston Tea Party was portrayed in a lesson plan.
And Mr. Chairman, I just asked the question, Mr. Chairman, because on either side of the political spectrum, I just have concerns that politicizing, the idea of control of curriculum could be a control of ideas, and we've got enough fights in Washington. We don't need to fuel that by national attack on curriculum. That just gives me some...
And to be clear, that last example was not from the Common Core. That was from someone in my home state that had misused our curriculum. So I want to be very clear, I was not ascribing that. I was ascribing that to folks in my place that had done that improperly. And so I think that regardless of your administration, regardless of your state, there are opportunities for shenanigans in these type of arenas.
Thank you. Number 9.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In my situation, I have an amazing Air Force base in my community. How would you solve the issue of students coming in and out of the state of Georgia from other states without Common Core, when we're trying to get kids to where they're up to speed when they walk into our schools and they have come from somewhere else?
Sure. I had no problem with states actively collaborating, working together, making comparable standards, and truly collaborating. I was one of the first 7 states to join the American Diploma Project, which actually sought to make sure that our high school graduation standards were consistent or higher than other states. We joined the Military Compact for Student Education to make sure that when military families came to our state, we had a transition plan for those mobile students so that they didn't fall behind. So I think there are plenty of ways that you can help mobile student populations without having to cede control. And as I said, common item development. You could reduce costs immensely for assessment and enable states to make very valid comparisons about student performance and an understanding of what's going on in other states by having a common item bank. It would be cheaper for states, and they could embed those items in their state assessments, and we can make valid comparisons with the NAEP assessment as a quality check against all of it. So things that already exist and systems that are already in place, and with a little true collaboration among states, I think we could address that concern quite well.
I promised Dr. Scott this segment would be over at 2:30. I think we have about 5 minutes. Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I guess this question is for you. don't see a bill before us that addresses what he's talking about. Are we going to vote on whether we accept Common Core's basic strategies? Or will that be the Board of Education? I mean, I don't understand why he's speaking before us and taking all this time.
Because I think Common Core is a very big issue coming before education in the state of Georgia and the United States as a whole. And I think we are here as the respective committees of education in both houses of the legislature, and the bills that come before us, I think we need to consider it. I know we have a lot of new members on both of the education committees of the respective houses, and I think from an educational standpoint, this meeting today, we have 3 other speakers scheduled to come. None of them have to do with a particular bill. We're talking about different facets of education. This is more of an educational setting than advocating for or against a bill.
Okay, are we going to have someone who speaks for Common Core to come before us as well?
I have no problem with that at all.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Miller?
Can I follow Senator James on that?
Absolutely.
I think it would make a lot of sense after this presentation, it was very well done too, I might add, that we have Kristen Bernard from the governor's office speak why we are in Common Core. We've got at least 46 states, I think they're still involved with it. And I know people like the Southern Regional Education Board, the Georgia Partnership, they support it. So I think the department obviously supports it. I see Martha Radcliffe back there. But I would suggest we have Kristen Bernard come and make a presentation of why we're in this, so we have both sides of the issue, if that would be all right down the road.
I don't have any problem with that whatsoever. Quite frankly, I don't think there's any question about whether the DOE was going to support this, and I think sometimes if you have open and honest discussion of both sides, you're probably going to have another side coming from outside of the establishment of the system, and I think it's good as we consider different areas to have a full spectrum of discussion. That's my purpose of having Dr. Scott here today, and he was on a very short time frame. Do we have any other questions? We have about 2 minutes. If not, Dr. Scott, thank you for spending 30 minutes with us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And in just one closing statement, I will acknowledge that I was asked to be here on short notice, and I appreciate that. But my purpose here is not to tell you what to do. I respect your right as a state to make decisions about your children. I simply bring my perspective of a state who said no and paid a price. And I just wanted to give you my experience and my understanding of the law and the federal law and why this was done and why it's happening the way it is. And repercussions that are coming, because I simply say the bills are coming to you. And so I simply just want to be able to say to you now before it happens, so that when it happens, someone will have said it to you before you get the bill. That's my purpose here.
Representative.
Very quick question. Is it true that federal law today prohibits there from being a national curriculum?
Yes, the department is prohibited in 3 separate federal laws from being involved in creating a national curriculum.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all very much. I enjoyed my time here.
The next segment of our joint meeting this afternoon